Uh, Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. We have everybody from around the globe today joining in for this session. Welcome to this webinar on environmental monitoring. We call it the Managing the Invisible. So this is part of our monthly webinar that we now conduct to increase the awareness about food safety within the industry. Like they say, what cannot be measured cannot be managed, and most of the industry today struggle with the idea on what to measure, what to monitor, manage, and today's webinar we would try to answer some of the questions in the context of academia, industry, and the supply chain. So I welcome all my panelists. We will start with the introduction of our panelists today. Today we have Mr. Achyut Adhikari, who is an associate professor at Louisiana State University and specialty is food safety. Next on our panel, we have Mr. Krishna Joshi. He is the head of regulatory and quality at ITC Foods. And finally, Mr. Srinivas. Mr. Srinivas is the head of quality assurance at Metro Cash and Carry, which is one of the largest B2B retail chain in India. So let's start with hearing our panel's thought on the importance of environmental monitoring vis-a-vis food safety. To start with, we'll have Mr. Achyut first going ahead. Mr. Achyut, can you put some thoughts, on the whole webinar that we have today on the environmental monitoring? Over to you, Achyut. Share your thoughts again.
Okay. So thank you, Sarika, for the opportunity, and hello, everyone. It's kind of like 11:30 here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so I'm kind of like a little bit sleepy. So please excuse me if I yawn during talking. So the main goal of the environmental monitoring program is to aggressively try to find out pathogens or allergens from processing facility before it contaminates the product. But in today's webinar, I will be focusing more on the bacterial pathogens. When we talk about microorganisms, these microorganisms are everywhere in the environment. These organisms are so tiny that they are invisible from our naked eye, and they don't produce any odor, or when they are in very few numbers, they does not leave any signs of their physical existence. In food industries, we typically group these microorganisms in three different categories. So the first type of group is those organisms that are useful, or those organisms that are beneficial to our health. Those organisms that we use for our food production, for example, lactic acid bacteria. There are second another group of microorganisms that actually destroy our product and make that product unfit for consumption. And those group of microorganisms are known as spoilage microorganisms. These organisms, when they get into our food, and if we consume them, they may not necessarily cause any diseases, but we don't want to eat any spoiled food. And the third group of microorganisms is the one that is very nasty, and those are known as pathogens. And those microorganisms actually cause diseases. So in order to detect those microorganisms, the only way is the microbiological testing. So finding the bacterial pathogens in a processing facility before it contaminates the product is looking like a needle in a haystack, usually when you don't know if the needle even exists. So in general, there are two groups of microorganisms that are present in a processing environment. When you are developing an environmental monitoring program, you usually group those organisms in, again, two different categories. One is a transient microorganisms, and then the another one is resident microorganisms. So transient microorganisms are those microorganisms, those are introduced into your facility or product through the inputs that we use in a processing facility. For example, raw materials like workers or packaging materials. And these transient microorganisms are easily removed through normal cleaning and sanitation process. Typically, these transient microorganisms will not become established in the environment. The another group of microorganisms is the resident microorganisms. And these are the organisms that become established in the environment. And they may persist for a long time also. And the normal cleaning process and sanitizing process may reduce the numbers, but they may not eliminate those types of microorganisms. So within these two groups of microorganisms, when we are developing an environmental monitoring program in a food industries, the focus is on two different bacterial pathogens. One is Salmonella, and then the another one is the Listeria species. So we all know like Salmonella is a bacterial pathogen that can cause disease, can cause fever, diarrhea, some hospitalization, and then people may die with Salmonella also. On the other hand, Listeria species, when we talk about Listeria species, Listeria monocytogenes is a bacterial pathogen that is very nasty. I always talk about Listeria monocytogenes because it is everywhere in the environment, but it is so nasty that if 5 people are infected with Listeria monocytogenes, there is always a chance that one person may die. And that is very much important with this organism, the Salmonella and Listeria monocytogenes, because Salmonella, these organisms, the Salmonella can grow in low moisture food. So whenever we are producing low moisture food, we really need to focus on our environmental monitoring program on Salmonella. If we are producing ready-to-eat food, high-risk food, and then if in our processing line, if our product is exposed to the environment after the process control, then we need to focus on Listeria species. So what is an environmental monitoring program? So environmental monitoring program is a program which includes pathogen or indicator swabbing as appropriate to detect risk of microbial contamination in the processing environment. So with the environmental monitoring program, we can also verify that the sanitation procedures are operated as intended. The important part is it is a risk and science-based. So any procedures that we develop on environmental monitoring program must be based upon science and must be based upon risk specific to each facility. So any environmental monitoring program that we develop must be tailored for each facility. If we look back, 6 years, we will see that all the environmental monitoring program that time was actually covered under the General Good Manufacturing Practices program. But because of this increased foodborne disease outbreak in last couple of years, this environmental monitoring program is now covered under the preventive control programs.
Yeah, so yeah, Achyut, I think, so that was a great, opening from you. And then I think folks are really worried now about the microorganisms that can be there in the facility and what they have to look at, right? So, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And now would like Mr. Krishna to give his perspective, looking at it from the point of the view of the manufacturer, so which is one of the largest at that in India, right? So over to you, Mr. Krishna, your views on the monitoring plan that we have.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Sarika, Ramesh, Achyut, Srinivas. I will, pointedly, I will talk about something a little bit, divergent from microbiological part also. So I will quickly cover that. We don't have much and enough time to deliberate on each and every subject in detail. So what I will do is I will quickly cover some part of the actual environment also, which is outside you, for example, your air, water, etc. So there are also some, legislations are there. So I will club three things. One, manufacturing. The other part is that microbiological part. Third part is the non-microbiological part. Third part is your regulatory aspect of it, right? So these are the three things I thought I will share with you. Definitely, Achyut has said about, what kind of microbiological monitoring and what kind of risk is there to the food products. With respect to the manufacturing facilities, basically the risk depends on many things. For example, what kind of processes you have, what kind of characteristics you have. Something may not, some plan may not work in the juices which is there for the biscuits, and the biscuit plan may not work for the juices as well. In addition to that, there are if there are non-compliances, non-adherences, then government statute comes in and adjudications, use penalties, fine and imprisonment also the part of that entire monitoring systems, if I look at it differently. Cleaning, sanitization obviously is an important part in the primary part of any monitoring program and it plays an important role in ensuring the food safety. Basically, if I say that various parameters that one may choose to evaluate as a part of any environment monitoring program is, the potential source of contamination like raw material, ingredient supplies, food handler, animals, packaging materials, process equipment, tools, environment including, like I told you, air, soil, wastewater, silage and facilities, etc. So on each of these you have many regulators, like FSSAI governs your finished food products, your raw material, ingredient, okay, and there are some other parts which are related to environment. Then the Factories Act and other similar acts come into picture. EPA is there, Environment Protection Act, and then accordingly you will be imposed, adjudicated if you are not adhering to those standards. The other part is the places where organism might colonize are your floors, your walls, beams, roofs, drains, some electrical outlets, boxes, manufacturing equipment, delivery and loading areas. And most importantly, when we do a risk assessment, we forget our air filters. Sometimes we need airs to wipe out certain kind of residual part from our equipment machines. We use general air either, or we use compressed air. There we have we should look at those specific filters required to be put in the those equipments. The other part is the factor which can or that could impact the organism growth. They are your, again, design, adverse event, transportation related, climate related, and facility allowed design, etc. On personal considerations, your hand hygiene, personal hygiene, so many things are there which are, currently you might be seeing, the people are more, going towards that side. So there are three approaches for hygiene monitoring. One is the visual inspection. So it should give you a quick and big picture about the effectiveness of the cleaning process. So the primary part is cleaning and sanitation. Before going into the high funda techniques and isolation kind of things and testing part, first thing is the visual inspection, cleaning and sanitation. And then obviously you will look for some type of testing of microbiological hazards like ATP testing, etc. So the microbiological testing is the another one which comes into picture, and then you have certain ATP based quick test method for that. In addition to that, as I told you, for the benefit of our participants, there could be many environment which are equally important to manage and may also be covered going forward during extension of this topic of this seminar. For example, the regulatory policy and advocacy environment is an important environment. If you do not set your policies and advocacy at right time, at the right place, with the right kind of parameters, you will be bound to imposed by the food safety officers or legal metrology officer or any other officer who is controlling your environment. Consumer environment is another important factor wherein you can look at there could be a lot of discussion on that, how to manage the consumer. Because I give you one example. I have a cookie of diameter say 5 centimeter, and the one consumer is coming to us saying that I found a almost 9-inch wire in your cookies. So a cookie with a 5 centimeter diameter or 5-inch diameter, how it can have a 9-inch long wire in it? I don't know. I do not understand that. So I'm saying that there are certain other environment which has to be managed appropriately. Chemical and toxin is another area where we can look at food frauds and food adulteration within the supply chain is also important factor wherein environment monitoring is utmost important. And obviously the another part is, which is a big chunk, which is beyond that microbiology, is EHS environment under the EPA Act, Environment Protection Act, wherein all these aspects which I have already briefed about. So this is something we need to look at on a as far as the manufacturing setup is concerned.
So that's quite insightful, actually. A whole lot of learning, and I'm like thinking now, saying like, yes, an hours program is not enough to cover the whole environmental monitoring program, but that's what we have. So let's try the best out of the time that we have. So now moving on to Mr. Srinivas, and I'm sure a lot of people might be wondering, right, how is this relevant basically in a food industry with a retail chain? So definitely with the experiences that we have, right, every link in the supply chain is important in perspective for the food safety. So Srinivas, if you can put your thoughts from the perspective of a retail chain, saying like how is environmental monitoring works out in the whole system.
Yeah, thank you, Sarika. I think it's a good platform. It's a good chain now. I think as we have heard from academicians, and now I think from Krishna also on actually the manufacturing base. But this is definitely, and actually people when they think about retail, they always think about buy and sell. So I want to actually say more, I think from an angle of actually what we protect, and then actually how we are also an important linkage. And also before actually starting that, what I would actually say is the topic is very relevant, because now we are actually in the midst of the coronavirus. Managing the invisible actually has been a big fight. So this also, I think what we are covering now actually from an environmental monitoring program, this is actually a very apt program actually considering the situation now. Of course, I mean, like we will not well into the virus per se, but actually more towards the bacteria, as I think Mr. Achyut has already explained. Now, from a retail perspective, actually what I wanted to begin is actually before for the listeners, I just wanted to actually give a brief glimpse about what Metro is. Metro Cash and Carry is actually a 100% wholesale subsidiary from the German-based Metro Group, which operates in 26 countries, and we also are actually the top 5 retailers and wholesalers actually in the globe. And we operate under the B2B model, and then we are an actually more dominant actually as a cash and carry concept worldwide. So again, I mean, like we started in 1964 in Germany, and we have densified in Europe, and very limited operation as of now in Asia. But yes, I mean, like we are now actually going very big actually in the Asian countries also. And we have a different challenges where I'm bringing actually from an environmental monitoring program is Europe and West actually have quite advanced in terms of an EMP program as compared to actually the Asian zone, where we have actually a lot of other challenges. In India, we operate 27 stores, and we are actually also celebrating the 17th anniversary now. We started in 2003. So we were actually from an environmental monitoring program. What I wanted to state was we were the first HACCP certified store when we began our story actually in 2009-10 when we started to certify. Now, as I said earlier, retail looks pretty simple for buy and sell, but of course, I mean, we do have a lot of open products like fruits and vegetable, meat, fish, which we sell from a dairy products as well. Also, I think from a wholesale concept, we do sell a lot of open commodities. We call it as the loose commodities. So and live bakery as well. So the important thing is from a pathogen actually or any other bacteria which is actually there in the environment, it becomes very important for us to actually monitor these environmental hygiene. So for Metro Group, we have actually a supply chain standard which typically takes care of the supplier qualification requirements, including the primary production and then the manufacturing food. And also we have something in the store food safety and hygiene standard and food service delivery. So we cover the entire gamut of the supply chain, supplier qualification, again food safety for the store, and then the food service delivery. Now, we also do sell a lot of private label, and here I think quality assurance plays a very important role because the legality is completely on us as a actually retailer or wholesaler. And in this, actually, we have a complete minimum requirements actually for selling this own brand. The standard actually would cover more towards actually the Global Food Safety Initiative, like the standards on IFS or BRC or HACCP. Of course, HACCP is currently not there as part of the GFSI scheme, but earlier it was part of the GFSI scheme. Now, metro stores particularly are covered actually under the food safety and hygiene standard. And here actually the minimal operational requirements actually which are typical for a wholesale store would be actually in terms of handling, as Krishna mentioned earlier. I think it has typically got to do with the personal hygiene. It has got to do with actually the staff training, infection control, protective clothing. So there are various topics actually which are covered as part of the store food safety and hygiene. One of the typical ones actually which we also look from a retail and wholesale angle would be the construction and facility management, which actually also about the site exterior. Normally when you handle these packed foods and also the open food, I think it becomes very apt for us actually also to look at the construction. Housekeeping and hygiene, this has already been covered. Cleaning and disinfection, waste management, pest control, which is very relevant for the retail sector, and food safety management, which is actually more got to do with the foreign body control, calibration, specifications, and also one of the other important aspects for a retail is the temperature management, and that actually plays a very key role, especially when you sell frozen and fresh chilled products like meat, fish, and fruits and vegetable. Product management, something actually which we also take care in the goods receiving, and food service delivery. Of course, our entire HACCP program is covered from goods receiving till actually we have the food service delivery, because one of the important customers where we cater is also the HoReCa segments, which is hotel, restaurants and caterers, who are actually very finicky about quality and food safety. And of course, we do have sampling. And we do have actually some external managed activities like the service controls and then the audits, which are there actually as part of this food safety hygiene standard. So all in all, what I wanted to say for the retail sector also is this store food safety and hygiene standard, what I'm typically covering, covers the entire PRPs and then the HACCP and food safety standards, what we adopt to all our stores in the country. We are also HACCP certified, which covers more or less the entire food safety program. And this becomes actually a very important topic actually as far as environmental monitoring is concerned from a retail wholesale sector, Sarika.
So that's great to hear from you, Srinivas. And I know, Achyut was saying like we have to handle the nasty bacteria that are there in the environment. And Mr. Krishna Joshi was saying you have to manage the other parameters as well. And Srinivas tried putting in what are the key parameters that as Metro they are handling, to make the system robust, ensuring the contaminants are not there in the system. So, so I think it's a great way to put it together, and I know it's not as simple as you all sound to be. You have, as soon as I think people who are tuned in have to go back, they realize that, they have to start working on their system. So now on to Mr. Krishna. Do you think there is a large variation in the plan based on your different verticals? Like you guys have the baked product, the beverages, confectionaries, ready to eat product, and many more, right, in the list. So the question is, does the environmental monitoring plan vary from one unit to another?
Yeah, definitely. It varies, and let me tell you, our all facilities, be it as an ITC owned facility or the contract manufacturing facilities, they are all, ISO FSSC 22000 certified. We had so many, different advanced system in place, to support the environment monitoring, to control the hazard, food safety, etc. And we have been, keep representing in various awards and CII, this, that, international awards, and on an average, if I say that every month we get almost one award on the food safety part. So with that experience, we understood global perspective also, and also yes, it is not one solution for each product and each process and each factory. It depends on the regulatory requirement. It depends on consumer specific requirement, product category, inherent product profile. It also depends on for example, moisture, water activity, solid content, process, intended use, etc. All these things we built into our understanding when we look at a food safety monitoring plan. Change in the source of water, ingredient, process, infrastructure. So many things are there. People, layout, equipment design. You talk everything. Product characteristics. Type of packaging. If we are changing the packaging, again our monitoring plan will differ. Storage and warehousing conditions, unanticipated food safety problems, natural calamity, epidemic. You talk each and every factor which is there in this environment. It impacts the food safety, and accordingly the food safety monitoring plan gets changed. For example, I will tell you that because of water activity, the monitoring plan used in the biscuit manufacturing will have a different connotation and different setup and different understanding as compared to the juices manufacturing facility. Sometimes what happens in our integrated integrated unit, where everything is there inside one campus. So it becomes a very difficult to manage, at one side, in one location of that entire facility, the biscuit is getting manufactured. Another is, the cereal products are getting manufactured. A third one is the dairy, and the fourth one is that juices and, other products, etc. So it depends on the type of, like the different parameters which I told you. It depends on those. And definitely the monitoring plan will be entirely different for all types of processes, manufacturing setups, products, etc.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Krishna. So I'm sure there's a lot more than we can cover in this short session.
Hello?
Yep, you're audible. You're audible, Mr. Krishna. Yeah. So I'm sure we can cover, we can't cover a whole lot in this session, but sure, as Mr. Krishna highlighted, there are various factors starting from the water activity to many other factors that can affect the overall system. Now moving on to Achyut. So as academician, do you see any huge gaps in the way the industry is addressing the whole environmental monitoring?
Exactly. So what I feel is there are different priorities, priority areas of food safety if we go to different parts of the world. So for example, I was in India last year and I hosted the preventive control of human foods and then the Produce Safety Alliance growers training in 2 parts of India. So what I realized was the priority area in South Asia is more on, in food safety, the priority area is more on chemical contaminant, pesticide residues. Here in US is other side. So here in US, the chemical residues, chemical contaminants, pesticide residues are a food safety hazard, but the priority is much more on microbial pathogens, microbial contamination. So that's a really important gap. And when we talk about environmental monitoring program, as I mentioned before, environmental monitoring program was under the GMP. It was covered under GMP. But because of this Food Safety Modernization Act, now the environmental monitoring program is covered under the preventive control system, because in US, what we realize is in last 10 years, there is increasing number of foodborne disease outbreak. And most of those foodborne disease outbreak were traced back to processing facilities as the source of contamination, more microbial contamination. Okay, so the emphasis here is on microbial safety. Even here, I have a lab and then we provide testing service from our lab also to small and medium-sized industries in Louisiana. And those small and medium-sized industries, when they have to sell to a grocery store, when they have to sell to big chain like Walmart or Whole Foods, or when they have to meet the federal regulatory requirement, they have to develop an environmental monitoring program. Okay, and especially if they are producing high-risk food. But those industry personnel, they actually are really not clear about what exactly environmental monitoring program is. What are they testing for? Okay, so what I will tell the audience right now is, if you want to develop an environmental monitoring program, test for Listeria by default, genus Listeria by default. If you find Listeria species in your production line, then Listeria monocytes genus can also grow. And if you are looking for Listeria species as a whole, it is easy. It is easy to collect samples. It is easy to process. It is cheap to analyze. You can get those testing facility everywhere, very easy. And if Listeria species is positive, then you will go on and then test for Listeria monocytes genus. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a really important part. And as Krishna mentioned, Krishna mentioned about really important point that what are the different areas that we really need to test. So emphasis should be on not only on those smooth surface or easy to reach surface, but when you are developing your environmental monitoring program and then try to collect samples, you really need to think about those hard to reach places and then where product can build out and those organisms can grow. So those are the really important points that the industry still is kind of confused about. And the last point I really want to emphasize here is the frequency of sampling. And then what will be the frequency of sampling? Do you need to sample every week, monthly, or annually? Again, it depends upon the risk associated with the product. So if you are processing food product that is lower risk, then if you collect, if you collect samples once annually, that's fine. You will meet most of those third-party and regulatory requirements. But if you are producing high-risk food, and then if your food, after process control, is exposed to environment, and there is a risk of microbial contamination, then you may have to test product quarterly or as needed. So it all again, it depends upon the type of the food, the processing line, and then the regulatory requirement in each country. So
Okay, so yeah, Achyut, so I think that's a great point, saying depending on your processes, you have to design your environmental monitoring plan. You have to put in together your frequencies, the microorganisms that you need to check for it. So yeah, so coming back to you, Mr. Krishna, do you think these plans needs to be updated? And in the current context that we have, like how Mr. Srinivas was mentioning, saying like COVID-19 trigger happening, as a pandemic, do you think these triggers require revision and updation?
Say that, we all know this COVID is a blessing to discuss. that had raised the level of the awareness of personal hygiene and sanitation protocols for each one of us, right? So yes, in such unwarranted situations or otherwise also, you need to, depending upon, like the Achyut has said, depending upon the environmental factors, the changing in your surroundings, changing in your, change in your persons, people, layout, design, machine, and these kind of epidemics or, natural calamity or, unwarranted situations, definitely it is very, very important to update your plan as well. And also, the moment we need to keep a tab on the international understanding on this subject also, so that whenever there is a change in the understanding, maybe something true for today may not be relevant for tomorrow. So the tomorrow some understanding is changing, thought process is changing. I need to go back to my monitoring plan. Okay, need to look at it, and then accordingly you have to change it. Sometime it may not require changes. Now see, what is the difference between this COVID-19 and influenza virus? It's a similar kind of virus, but depending upon certain different characteristics like severity or whatever it is, it needs a different kind of monitoring plan as compared to the influenza virus. That's what essentially I'm trying to tell you. No, so we need to look at it. Whenever there is change in the environment, whenever there is a change in the concept, theory, understanding, national or internationally, yes, it has to be updated.
Okay.
For example, in case of ITC, I will give an example. We have immediately, the moment this COVID has started, culminating into the environment, and we have immediately set up an 24/7 doctor helpline. Crisis monitoring team is prepared. People movement has been restricted immediately. Identification, isolation, and automation, etc., has been taken care into our entire facilities, including offices, including our housing complexes. Entire sanitization program is being prepared. Corporate, guidelines has been issued. Government guideline has been integrated into our internal guidelines, and these kind of immediate changes have been done to address these kind of situations. So definitely, that updation is required, and that should be very quick the moment your environment is getting changing.
Okay, great. So point well covered, and I think any plan is not a permanent plan, and it needs a continuous review, updation based on the internal and external factors, your monitorings that you have been doing. So now moving to Srinivas. Srinivas, like you mentioned, and as we all know, you are a part of an international retail chain, right? So do you see any significant difference between how environmental monitoring is done back, in the stores near to your headquarters in Germany versus here in India?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. The entire thing, actually, as Mr. Achyut was saying, the West actually looks at it in a slightly different way as compared to actually the Asian zone. So I think typically when you look at metro cash and carry, one of the key ingredients is actually we try and then operate similar in all the 26 countries. So that's where I think the standards like the food safety and hygiene standards actually play typical and also a critical role. From actually your point and then actually perspective about what you're asking from an international to the local is, yes, I mean, like one of the key differences is that we have a dedicated store a quality professional who is being placed in every store, in all the 27 stores here. Typically, we don't see this kind of an operation actually in Europe, just actually because of the availability of the manpower and rest of the other things. So they typically manage it from the central side. So if there is an HACCP program or a food safety program which is being done, so this typically goes to all the store, and then there is a food floor manager who operates there. But here we have a technical person who is available in every store. He becomes actually an important element to monitor all the food safety system. Apart from these things, actually, or what I also would like to bring in is from an international perspective, I think Mr. Achyut will be knowing more about it, is that they cover more of a packed food. But we have actually a lot of open food like meat, fish, fruits and vegetables. The kind of selling what happened from a retail perspective is actually that we have a lot of loose products as well. But yeah, in comparison to that, I think that there is a very limited amount of open products which is available, and that becomes very key for the environmental monitoring program also. The second actually important thing is actually also there is a lot of temperature controls which are typically in an upgraded version in the West compared to the developing countries like us. Also, typically we suffer from the tropical climate, and there actually typically the temperatures outside actually are also very low. And this again actually brings in a key differential actually for especially for a bacteria or a pathogen actually has to grow. And this actually, if you bring in any meat from an organized plant and you don't handle it well actually at a retail segment, and just because of the temperature, it can go suddenly very high. So that's how I think, as Mr. Krishna was earlier mentioning, we as Metro actually try and then safeguard the interest of actually whatever is produced, and then actually till it is service to all the consumers in a safe and sound handling. So that's how we have also won a lot of awards from CII to everyone in terms of food safety. So that becomes actually a key differential. The third important actually aspect is also from authority. The legislations actually on the German food hygiene is far more stringent actually as compared to actually what we have on the food safety and standards now. But typically we have also upgraded, and then we are also fulfilling all the norms actually, which is typically there for a safe food consumption. That's again, I mean, like we have drawn a lot of these standards again from West, but Food Safety and Standards Authority of India has also done a great job, FSSA, in terms of actually implementing all these bacterial contamination. And the fourth aspect actually is more on digitization. So the digital tools actually are much more in the European zone. I mean, like typically for a food control or an environmental monitoring program or an audit-based programs, the digital facilities is more advanced actually in Germany as compared to actually the local scenario. But we are trying to integrate these things actually, typically how Germany operates, and then how we can actually look at this from a local operation. So these are the key differentials actually what I could think of when I look at my German counterparts actually, and then what they are typically doing in Europe as compared to the actually Asian countries. But we are fast-paced, as actually Krishna said. I would also say that this is a blessing in disguise for all of us, and the quality has actually been a foremost thing now actually, and sanitization and cleaning being actually one of the typical a key factor during the COVID time. This has also upgraded, and we need to change the plans. And typically from a quality assurance, I would say that this has definitely gone 5 notches higher as compared to actually what we would be typically taking care of when there is no pandemic or a crisis. Yeah.
So so definitely yes, there's a difference between how the developed country handles to how we as a developing country is handling, and then also the climate makes a difference. The buying practices, the buying habits of the people around does make a difference to how you do what you do and how your environmental monitoring plan has to be. So yeah, I think we are running out of.
Am I audible now?
Yes, Mr. Krishna. Oh, okay. Looks like Mr. Krishna just dropped out of the meeting. So what we'll do is maybe we'll put across the questions that we have, which has been coming over from our people who are tuned in. So I'll read out few questions. So Achyut, this is for you. This is for you. And then people say, can you please share information on US FDA approval process for Indian food processing companies?
So basically, that will again fall under the FSMA requirement. That is the Food Safety Modernization Act requirement. So when we talk about this FSMA requirement, people mainly think about the preventive control of human food requirement only. But there are 7 different rules that's covered under the FSMA rules. So depending upon the type of the product that you wanna export to the United States, you may have to meet maybe 1, 2, or more than 2 different rules. Okay, take an example. If you are, if you want to export mango, we got a lot of mango from India. So if you want to export mango from India to the United States, you do need to meet the preventive control of human food requirement, because you may be processing mangoes in a processing line or packaging line. But in addition to that, you also has to meet the produce safety rule. And in India, we really does not, have much understanding about the produce safety rule. As I mentioned, when I went in India last year, that was the first training that we did in Asia. So we did it in Haryana that time. And one of the important requirements according to FSMA is those trainings is mandatory. So any facility, if it is from outside the US or inside US, if they fall under the produce safety rule, they have to take the produce safety rule training requirement. And that's a mandatory requirement. That's one part. The other part is the preventive control of human food requirement. And depending upon, depending upon the type of the product, again, I'm trying to categorize different products. If your product falls under high risk categories, then you may need to have a third-party certification. And when I'm talking about third-party certification, those third-party that certifies your facility must be approved by FDA. That's a really important point, because you cannot just get third-party certification from anyone. It needs to be approved by FDA. That's a really important part. And then the other 2 rules are foreign supplier verification program and accreditation of third-party auditors. So there may be a multiple different rules that may apply if you are planning to export any food from India to the United States.
Okay. Yep, that was great. That was a very detailed answer. I would like, we have another 4 minutes to take up the questions maybe, and then we'll extend it for another 2 minutes for a wrap up. I would request folks who are tuned in to put in the questions against the name of the panelist, so that it would help us to address the right question to the right panelist out here. We have something on this. What is the acceptable level of environmental monitoring microorganisms? I think again, I would like to put it to Achyut, being in the academia, and then I think you would understand the level of microorganisms far more better. Yeah.
So again, I discussed about that in my earlier today also. So the type of microorganisms that we are looking for in an environmental monitoring programs depend upon the type of product. Okay, so if we are producing low moisture food, again, we need to look for salmonella. We have an example of peanut butter. You guys may have remembered, we have a big, huge peanut butter outbreak in US, and then that covers so many different products. That was because of the contamination of salmonella from the processing facility to the product that time. So for low moisture food, we're looking for salmonella. For other high risk food, generally we will look for Listeria species, with emphasis on Listeria monocytogenes. Okay, so I really want to reiterate again, when you are looking for those microorganisms, you don't have to really test for bacterial pathogens directly. You can look for indicator microorganisms also. So when you are looking for indicator microorganisms, then it will be easy. You don't have to hold your product for a long time, because testing indicator microorganisms, you can get the results much more quicker than testing for pathogens. Okay, you don't have to hold for a longer time, and then it may be cheap also. if you get, if your indicator organisms is positive, then only go for the detection of pathogens. So you really need to make sure that your environmental monitoring program is appropriate based upon the risk associated with your product. That's a very important thing.
Yeah. So I think we have a few more questions, but then it's not too relevant, to the environmental monitoring. I'll just put it across, if any one of you can, go ahead and reply that. Somebody has a question on a metal detector, and they say metal detector probe size is 1 mm size of the metal is not harmful to the human consumption, or metal detector cannot sense the below 1 mm of ferrous. Please advise. I know it's out of the lot question, but then and then continuous on that is how are contaminated food products discarded, either at the point of production or at the point of sale. So I think Srinivas, if you would like to take that up, saying like how are contaminated food products discarded either at the point of production or at the point of sale.
I think I would also answer the previous one, because we are also into the live bakery, and so it becomes actually very typical. Of course, it goes into more of a manufacturing. Yes, I agree to the point actually that the 1 mm and then actually the below, whatever, like the thickness, actually what they have been saying, it's far more difficult. But there have been actually some research and development which is happening on the metal detectors. But coming on to the point of metal detector, I think as far as I am concerned, actually it is a very, very important tool, and it should be available actually as a food safety hazard actually in the manufacturing or any kind of a bakery operation. And typically, yes, I think we need to, as far as possible, actually avoid this. There are multiple means, again, like going into the right way of the raw material processing, raw material taking inward. All these things actually are a typical program actually which we also need to develop and then put it across. And I firmly believe that actually, yes, metal detection actually is an important parameter. So having said this, and then actually also second aspect would be that yes, we have an at the point of sale also, I think we have an effective disposal mechanism. And for all the contaminants actually or contaminated actually food, typically what we do is actually we segregate this, and we also have a typical actually waste disposal mechanism. Which is actually either got to do with actually tied up with an organization actually or a third-party waste disposal schemes. And so this is actually very important when it comes to meat, fish, and fruits and vegetables, because in the microbial actually spoilages, you need to also have a typical way of handling this when there is a large tonnage, because as a wholesale we also operate close to actually say 2 tons or 3 tons of meat. And when you come to know, typically there is an actually spoilage which has happened. You need to segregate this. You need to actually have a separate disposal mechanism, and also actually or what happens post that actually the incineration or the kind of actually disposal actually which needs to be done typically for a microbiologically contaminated food is also taken care of. So this is how actually we do it, Sarika, from our end.
Yeah. So that was such a candid answer, saying like exactly what you do in your system and how it's important, to take care of the microorganisms. So yeah, I think we are running out of time now, and we would like to, close this session with some quick final remarks from Achyut. Would you like to? From Achyut, would you like to wrap it up quickly? What you had to just give a one-liner to all our people who are tuned in.
Okay. Yeah. So in summary, I want to reiterate to use the environmental monitoring program to aggressively seek out pathogens or allergens in the environment before they contaminate the product. So environmental monitoring should be performed by personnel who has received appropriate training to identify likely sampling spots and use appropriate tools. There are so many appropriate tools right now, in the market. So use appropriate tools to collect the samples.
Great. That was great. And Srinivas, would you like to wrap it, with a liner from your side before we, close the session?
Sure, Sarika. I think, as Achyut said, and then I think previously also Krishna said, for all of us actually being integrated, be it academia or be it manufacturing or be it retail, so I think all of us are put together actually are harping on the fact that it has to be a safe food to the consumer or actually somebody who consumes it. There is nothing called as actually that it doesn't apply to retail, it doesn't apply to XYZ sectors. We have to ensure that actually that this is having a safe food consumptions actually finally. So from my perspective, from a retail perspective, although the things looks very simple from buy and sell, it is not so simple actually from an environmental monitoring program per se. We have to do all that is necessary actually typically what's happening in the manufacturing till today actually to the retail sector also. The reason for that is we have a goods receiving, we have an actually storage, we have actually a typical selling food service delivery system. So all these supply chain actually has to act, and then environmental monitoring program plays a very, very important role. And then for the topic what you have brought in, managing the invisible, yes, these are some things which we can't see. So naturally we should have an actually highest kind of safety programs knitted into it, so that also there is a food safety ensured all across, be it in West or be it in Asia. I think people who are consuming are the same, and then we have to ensure that food safety is given a paramount importance. That's it from me.
That's really great. So thank you everyone. And I think the best about this webinar was we got to hear a variety of insights into it. This has been it wouldn't have been successful without all of you guys. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, Achyut, Srinivas, and Mr. Krishna. I think he had to leave, he had something else. So and then you have offered definitely us a speck of your knowledge today, and spending your valuable time with us. So for sure, I think folks who have tuned in today, they will scratch their head, go back and start looking at the invisible that is there in the units or in and around that. With the time today, we all know with the COVID saying how important it is to manage your invisible that's there. So one of the biggest threats of a food company, I think, is to face a food safety incident, which can lead to a recall. So not only a recall not only harms your consumers, as Srinivas was mentioning, saying you have to provide safe food to your consumer, for sure, yes, but that can also affect your brand integrity and your profitability. So one of the best proactive approach is to mitigate the risk, and having a robust pathogen monitoring plan is imperative for every food company. Doesn't matter whether you are in a manufacturing, whether you are a MSME handling your small units, or whether you are in a retail chain. So it makes very, very important for you to have a robust monitoring program. So for sure, a well-designed EMP can save companies money by reducing product holes, product destruction, and recall. So thank you all once again for joining, and hope the insights will help you to put together your own environmental monitoring system. This was our second attempt in the series of monthly webinars, which we launched on the occasion of World Food Safety Day last month. You can watch the recording from this session on the same YouTube channel, links to which will be there on the description, so next month we will be back with yet another interesting webinar, and the topic could be on the e-commerce and food safety. To stay updated on the webinars, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and you can follow us on FB, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Insta, and our handle is Food Safety Works. So we do regularly share news and insights about what is going on in the world of food safety. As a company, we do provide end-to-end solutions for food safety. We do conduct virtual trainings on every Friday between 11 to 1. So stay tuned in for those training programs. You check out, how we can help you in your journey. Please visit our website www.foodsafetyworks.com. While you are there, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, and thank you once again for joining. Have a good rest of the day and wishing you safe times ahead. Thank you, Srinivas. Thank you, Achyut, once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.